Have you ever noticed how truly strong people don't need to shout about their strength? They don't chase approval, they don't beg for attention, and they don't waste their lives on things that drain their spirit. Instead, their power comes from what they refuse to allow into their lives. It's like keeping spoiled milk in the fridge. Every time you open the door, it ruins everything else around it. Or like carrying a phone with a cracked screen, headphones with only one side working, or a chair with a missing leg. You can still use them for a while, but deep down you know they'll fail you when you need them most. That's exactly what happens when you allow the wrong things in your life. Weak boundaries, toxic people, wasted time. They don't seem catastrophic at first, but slowly they drain your energy and poison your peace. Strong people know this truth. If you wouldn't keep a broken tool you can't rely on, why keep habits, relationships, or distractions that are just as damaging? Because while others waste their lives chasing approval, gossip, or fear, strong people make a choice: guard their peace or lose it forever. And when they choose themselves, that's when strength becomes undeniable. The moment they stop allowing the wrong things is the moment they rise above them. So what are these things strong people never tolerate? Stay until the end, because the last one isn't just advice, it's a philosophy for life. Let's get started. Number 1. Disrespect of their boundaries. Let's talk about one of the clearest signs of inner strength: refusing to tolerate disrespect of personal boundaries. Strong people understand that boundaries are not walls meant to keep others out. They're shields that protect their peace, energy, and self-respect. When someone repeatedly crosses those boundaries, whether it's ignoring their no, dismissing their feelings, or overstepping personal space, they see it for what it truly is: a lack of respect. And here's the truth: when someone doesn't respect your boundaries, what they're really showing you is that they don't respect you. Strong people don't waste time giving endless chances in this area. They know that if someone truly values them, they'll listen, they'll respect limits, and they won't treat boundaries like negotiable suggestions. But those who continually push past them, they get cut off. Because strong people understand something essential: peace is priceless, and once you allow others to trample your limits, you're inviting chaos into your life. Here's the reality: boundaries are not about controlling others, they're about controlling yourself. By setting clear lines, you're saying, "This is how I deserve to be treated, and this is what I will not allow." Strong people live by that standard, because they know that tolerating repeated disrespect is the fastest way to erode self-worth. They don't explain, they don't over-justify, they don't beg others to understand. They simply set the boundary once, and if it's violated, they walk away. And this is where Stoic wisdom comes in. Marcus Aurelius once said, "He who does not respect himself will not be respected by others." Think about that. Respect always begins within. If you don't value your own peace enough to protect it, no one else will. When you allow people to continuously disrespect your boundaries, you're teaching them how to treat you. But when you enforce your limits without apology, you're showing the world that your time, energy, and dignity are non-negotiable. Let me share a story. A woman I know, let's call her Emily, had a colleague who constantly pushed past her limits. Emily would politely decline late-night work messages, but this colleague kept calling anyway. She asked multiple times for him to respect her schedule, but he ignored it, brushing her off with lines like, "It'll just take a second." For months, Emily tolerated it, telling herself it wasn't worth making a scene, but the stress built up, and she realized something. Her peace was slowly being stolen. Finally, she decided enough was enough. She confronted him directly, set a firm line, and when he still refused to respect it, she went above him and had her boundaries formally protected. After that, not only did he stop, but others around her began to respect her time more too. Why? Because she showed that she respected herself enough to demand it. So how do you handle people who disregard your boundaries? First, be clear and direct. Don't water down your limits or soften your words to make others comfortable. Second, don't over-explain. A boundary isn't a debate, it's a decision. And finally, act on it. If someone keeps crossing the line, stop giving them access to your time, your energy, and your life. At the end of the day, strong people know this. When you protect your boundaries, you protect your peace. And nothing is worth more than that. If someone refuses to respect the limits you've set, you don't beg them to change. You change your proximity to them. Because respect isn't requested, it's enforced. And once you hold firm, you'll find that the right people will always honor the space you need, while the wrong ones will remove themselves. Number 2, being manipulated by emotions. Let's talk about something that separates the truly strong from the easily swayed. They refuse to be manipulated by emotions. Life constantly throws situations at us that stir anger, fear, guilt, or even envy. For most people, these emotions can cloud judgment, push them into regretful decisions, or make them react impulsively. But strong people, they recognize that if they don't master their emotions will master them. And nothing is more dangerous than letting temporary feelings dictate permanent choices. Here's the truth. Anger, fear, and guilt are powerful tools for manipulation. Think about it. How many times have you seen someone pushed into saying yes to something they didn't want because they felt guilty? Or someone lashed out in anger only to regret their words moments later? Or fear kept a person stuck in a situation that was destroying them? Strong people understand this pattern, and they don't allow it to control them. They know that reacting emotionally often means handing power over to someone else. Instead, they pause, they breathe, and they act from clarity, not impulse. This is where Stoic wisdom comes in. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, said, "Man conquers the world by conquering himself." The message is timeless. If you can't rule your own emotions, you'll always be ruled by external forces. Mastery of the mind is the foundation of true strength. The Stoics believed emotions aren't the enemy. It's the lack of discipline in handling them that causes suffering. By training yourself to observe emotions without being enslaved by them, you become untouchable. Let me share a story. A man I know, let's call him Daniel, worked in a high-pressure corporate environment. One day, during a heated meeting, a colleague tried to provoke him by questioning his competence in front of everyone. Most people in Daniel's shoes would have snapped back, raised their voice, maybe even said something they'd regret. But Daniel stayed calm. He looked at his colleague, let the silence hang for a moment, and simply said, "If you have concerns about my work, we can discuss them privately after this meeting." That one calm response flipped the entire room. His colleague looked petty, while Daniel looked composed and professional. Later, others came to him privately, admiring how he didn't take the bait. That moment proved that strength isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about staying centered when someone tries to pull you off balance. So how do strong people master their emotions? First, they practice awareness. Instead of denying or suppressing feelings, they notice them. Anger rising, fear building, guilt pressing, and they acknowledge them without acting impulsively. Second, they create space between feeling and action. They know that taking a pause, whether it's a few seconds of silence, a deep breath, or even walking away, can be the difference between control and regret. Third, they train their perspective. Stoics constantly reminded themselves, is this worth my peace? Will this matter in a week, a month, or a year? If the answer is no, they refuse to give it power. At the end of the day, strong people understand this. You can't control what life throws at you, but you can control how you respond. Those who are manipulated by emotions live as prisoners of circumstance. But those who master their emotions, they live free, because no matter how chaotic the world gets, their mind remains their strongest fortress, and that is where true power lies. Number 3, toxic relationships. Let's talk about one of the hardest but most necessary choices strong people make. They refuse to keep toxic relationships in their lives. It doesn't matter if it's a longtime friend, a family member, or a romantic partner. If the relationship is built on manipulation, betrayal, or constant negativity, strong people know they have no obligation to stay. Why? Because they understand this truth. No amount of history justifies holding on to something that poisons your peace. Here's the reality. Toxic relationships drain energy, cloud judgment, and weaken self-respect. Toxic people are skilled at keeping you entangled. They may guilt-trip you, remind you of the past, or use manipulation to make you feel responsible for their happiness. But strong people recognize these patterns for what they are: control tactics. Instead of excusing the behavior with lines like, "That's just how they are," or, "But I've known them for years," they ask themselves a simple question. Does this relationship make me better, or does it make me worse? And if the answer is the latter, they cut ties. This is where Stoic wisdom comes in. Seneca once said, "Associate only with those who make you better." Think about how powerful that is. The people closest to you shape your mindset, your confidence, and your habits. If you surround yourself with envy, bitterness, and manipulation, you'll absorb it, even if you don't mean to. But if you choose relationships that inspire you, challenge you, and support your growth, you'll naturally rise higher. Strong people refuse to entertain those who pull them down, no matter how familiar or comfortable the bond may seem. Let me share a story. A woman I know, let's call her Rachel, had a friend from childhood who had grown increasingly toxic over the years. Whenever Rachel shared good news, this friend would downplay it, saying things like, "Well, let's see if it lasts." Whenever Rachel set boundaries, the friend would mock her, acting like she was too serious or too sensitive. And anytime Rachel tried to distance herself, the friend guilt-tripped her with, "After everything we've been through, you're really going to abandon me?" For years, Rachel tolerated it, thinking loyalty meant holding on. But eventually, she realized that loyalty to someone else should never mean disloyalty to herself. She chose to walk away. And though it was painful at first, she later admitted it was the most freeing decision she'd ever made. So how do you deal with toxic relationships? First, identify the patterns. Pay attention to how you feel after spending time with someone, drained, anxious, or small. That's a sign. Second, set firm boundaries. If they respect them, the relationship may heal. If they don't, the disrespect speaks for itself. And third, have the courage to step away. Cutting ties doesn't make you cruel, it makes you wise enough to protect your peace. At the end of the day, strong people know this. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. The people in your life should uplift you, not drain you. And when someone refuses to respect your boundaries or your growth, the strongest move you can make is to let them go. because freedom begins where toxicity ends. If you found this valuable, hit like and subscribe for more powerful insights. Number 4. Dependence on approval. Let's talk about one of the biggest traps that strong people refuse to fall into: dependence on approval. Most people live their lives constantly looking outward for validation. They want applause when they succeed, reassurance when they doubt themselves, and comfort when they feel insecure. On the surface, it feels normal. Who doesn't like being appreciated? But here's the truth. When your self-worth depends on the opinions of others, you're never truly free. Strong people understand this. They know that crowds are fickle. Today they'll cheer, tomorrow they'll criticize, and the day after they'll forget. That's why they don't allow other people's approval or insults to define them. They don't measure their lives by claps or jeers. Instead, they measure themselves by their conscience, by their principles, and by their inner standards. Their compass isn't swayed by applause, and it isn't shattered by insults. They walk their path regardless of how others react. Here's the reality. When you need approval to feel worthy, you become easy to control. People can manipulate you by giving or withholding validation. They can make you doubt yourself with one harsh word or inflate your ego with false praise. Strong people refuse to give that kind of power away. They know that if you live for the crowd, you'll die with their silence. So instead of chasing approval, they live by integrity. They act not to impress, but to remain aligned with who they truly are. This is where Stoic wisdom shines. Marcus Aurelius once said, "You become powerful the moment you no longer seek approval." Think about that. The moment you stop needing others to tell you who you are, you reclaim control over your life. You're no longer a prisoner to outside voices. You no longer adjust your behavior to win applause or avoid criticism. You act because it's right, not because it's popular. And that's real strength. Let me share a story. A man I know, let's call him Alex, was an artist. At first, he created what he loved, pouring his passion into every piece. But when his work started gaining attention, he noticed something. He began creating for the audience, not for himself. If people praised one style, he stuck to it, even if it no longer inspired him. If they criticized, he abandoned entire projects halfway through. Over time, he lost touch with his own vision. Then, one day, he realized something. His art no longer felt like his. It felt like theirs. So Alex decided to let go of seeking approval. He returned to creating from his heart, regardless of likes or applause. At first it was uncomfortable, but soon his work became more authentic. And ironically, people respected him more when he stopped trying to please them. So how do you stop depending on approval? First, know your values. When you're clear about what matters most to you, it becomes easier to ignore outside noise. Second, practice indifference to praise and criticism. Accept them both as temporary. They don't define you. And finally, remind yourself daily, approval is nice, but not necessary. At the end of the day, strong people understand this. When you stop living for applause, you start living in truth. Approval may come and go, but integrity lasts forever. And the strongest among us walk their path with or without the crowd. Number 5. Excuses instead of responsibility. Let's talk about another thing strong people refuse to tolerate: excuses. Excuses are easy. They allow people to avoid blame, shift responsibility, and make themselves feel better in the moment. But here's the truth. Excuses don't solve problems, they only prolong them. Strong people know that if you want growth, trust and respect, you don't build them on blame, you build them on responsibility. Here's the reality. Excuses weaken character, while responsibility strengthens it. Think about it. When someone is always pointing fingers at circumstances, at other people, at bad luck, what they're really saying is, I'm not in control of my own life. But strong people know that ownership is power. The moment you accept responsibility, you gain the ability to change. Excuses may protect the ego for a moment, but responsibility builds resilience for a lifetime. This is why strong people don't allow excuses in their circle. They surround themselves with people who take ownership of their words, their actions, and their mistakes. Because excuses destroy trust. If someone keeps saying, "It wasn't my fault," or "I couldn't help it," you can't rely on them. But responsibility, that builds a foundation of respect. When someone says, "Yes, I messed up, and here's how I'll fix it," that's strength. This is where Stoic wisdom comes in. Seneca once said, "No man was ever wise by chance." In other words, wisdom and strength don't happen by accident. They come from making conscious choices, from owning your actions, and from refusing to let excuses become your default. The Stoics believe that while we can't control everything that happens, we can always control how we respond. And blaming others is never a response that builds strength. It only reveals weakness. Let me share a story. A man I know, let's call him Michael, worked in a small startup. Deadlines were tight, and every mistake cost the team valuable time. One of his teammates had a habit of making excuses. If he missed a deadline, he'd say, "Well, I didn't get enough support." If his work had errors, he'd blame the software or claim he wasn't trained properly. At first, people let it slide, but over time, his lack of responsibility drained the team's trust. On the other hand, Michael had a different approach. Whenever he slipped up, he owned it immediately. He'd say, "That was on me. Here's how I'll fix it." And then he followed through. Guess who became the leader of the team? Not the excuse maker, but the one who took responsibility. So how do strong people approach this in their own lives? First, they hold themselves accountable. They don't waste time blaming. They focus on solutions. Second, they expect accountability from others. If someone in their circle constantly makes excuses, they either challenge them to change or distance themselves. And third, they live by the principle that growth starts with ownership. Responsibility may feel heavy at times, but excuses are far heavier in the long run. They weigh down your progress, your reputation, and your future. At the end of the day, strong people know this. Excuses are the language of the powerless, while responsibility is the language of the strong. You can either choose to defend your mistakes with excuses, or you can own them and grow. But you can't do both. And the moment you choose responsibility, you step into real strength. If you've watched the video this far, don't forget to leave a comment with a "thank God" and give it a like if you enjoyed the content. Your support means a lot and motivates me to keep creating more interesting videos. I hope you find inspiration in them and that we continue learning together. Thank you for your support. Number 6. Fear as a master. Let's talk about one of the greatest enemies of strength, living under the control of fear. Everyone feels fear. It's a natural part of life. Fear shows up before big decisions, in moments of uncertainty, and whenever we step outside our comfort zone. But here's the difference. Weak people let fear dictate their actions, while strong people feel fear, but refuse to obey it. Here's the truth. Fear is a terrible master. When fear runs your life, it limits you. It convinces you to play small, to avoid risk, and to cling to comfort. It whispers, "What if you fail? What if you embarrass yourself? What if it all goes wrong?" And if you listen, you stay stuck exactly where you are. Strong people know that fear is loudest right before growth, which is why they lean into action. They don't ignore fear, but they refuse to let it paralyze them. For them, comfort is never more important than progress. This is where Stoic wisdom comes in. Seneca once said, "He who fears death will never do anything worthy of a living man." In other words, if you let fear of pain, failure, or even death control you, you'll never live fully. Fear shrinks your world, but courage expands it. Strong people understand that action matters more than comfort. Every time they choose courage over fear, they build resilience, confidence, and freedom. Let me share a story. A man I know, let's call him Mark, always dreamed of starting his own business. But for years, fear held him back. He worried about financial risk, about failing in front of others, about disappointing his family. So he stayed in a safe job that drained his passion. One day, after watching colleagues half as talented take risks and succeed, he realized something. Fear had been lying to him. It had promised safety, but delivered regret. Mark finally decided to act. Was he afraid? Absolutely, but he moved forward anyway. And even though the early days were hard, that decision changed his life. By refusing to let fear be his master, he discovered a deeper strength and a success he never would have reached otherwise. So how do strong people handle fear? First, they acknowledge it. Pretending not to be afraid doesn't work. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's action in spite of it. Second, they reframe it. Instead of asking, "What if I fail?" they ask, "What if I succeed?" They see fear as a signal of growth, not danger. And third, they choose movement over paralysis. They know that hesitation feeds fear, but action weakens it. At the end of the day, strong people understand this. Fear will always exist, but it doesn't have to control you. If you obey fear, you live small. If you face it, you live free. And that's the real difference. Weakness bows to fear, but strength uses it as fuel. Because life isn't meant to be lived in safety. It's meant to be lived with courage. Number 7. Disrespect of their time. Let's talk about one of the most important things strong people never allow: disrespect of their time. Time is the most valuable resource we have. You can regain money, rebuild health, even repair relationships. But once time is gone, it never returns. That's why strong people guard their hours as if they were life itself. They know that wasting time is wasting existence. Here's the truth. People who don't value your time don't value you. It shows up in many ways: chronic lateness, constant distractions, endless drama, or filling your life with obligations that bring no real purpose. Weak people tolerate it because they're afraid of saying no. But strong people, they know that every yes to something meaningless is a no to something important. They treat their time like gold, and they don't hand it over freely to those who waste it. This is where Stoic wisdom comes in. Marcus Aurelius said, "Do not waste the little time you have left in distraction." The Stoics believed that time was life itself. Every wasted hour isn't just lost minutes, it's lost opportunity, lost progress, and lost peace. That's why strong people are intentional. They choose carefully who they spend time with, what they focus on, and where they invest their energy. Let me share a story. A man I know, let's call him Chris, used to say yes to everything. If a colleague asked for help with work that wasn't his, he said yes. If friends invited him to things he had no interest in, he said yes. If family members asked for favors that drained him, he said yes. Over time, Chris realized he was exhausted, unfulfilled, and falling behind on his own goals. One day, he decided to change. He began setting boundaries, saying no without guilt, and only committing to what aligned with his values. At first, people were surprised, even upset. But eventually, they respected him more. And Chris found something he hadn't felt in years: control over his own life. So how do strong people protect their time? First, they say no often. They understand that saying no is not rude. It's respect for themselves. Second, they eliminate distractions. They don't let gossip, drama, or meaningless obligations eat away at their focus. And third, they spend time intentionally. Whether it's working on their goals, building meaningful relationships, or simply resting, they make sure every hour serves a purpose. At the end of the day, strong people know this. Time is not something you can borrow or replace. Every wasted hour is a piece of life you'll never get back. That's why they guard it fiercely, give it only to what matters, and refuse to let anyone or anything steal it. Because when you respect your time, you respect your life, and the people who truly value you will always respect both. Number 8. Obsessing over what they can't control. Let's talk about one of the greatest strengths strong people develop. They don't waste energy obsessing over things beyond their control. Life is full of external chaos: politics, other people's opinions, unexpected setbacks, or events that no one can predict. Most people get caught up in these storms. They lose sleep over things they can't influence, stress about the future, and spiral into worry about outcomes that may never happen. But strong people, they know better. They refuse to let external chaos rule their inner world. Here's the truth: obsessing over what you can't control is a guaranteed path to frustration. When you place your peace in the hands of things you cannot influence, you're surrendering your happiness to chance. You're saying, "I'll only be calm if the world cooperates with me." But the world won't always cooperate. People won't always act how you expect. Situations won't always unfold the way you want. Strong people understand this reality, and instead of trying to control everything, they redirect their focus to the one thing that truly belongs to them: their own mind, choices, and actions. This is where Stoic wisdom becomes invaluable. Epictetus said, "The chief task in life is to separate the things you can control from those you cannot." That's the essence of resilience. If you focus only on what is within your power, your responses, your effort, your perspective, you remain unshaken even when everything around you is chaotic. Strong people treat this as a daily practice, asking themselves, "Is this within my control? If not, why am I giving it my energy?" Let me share a story. A woman I know, let's call her Sarah, went through a tough divorce. At first, she spent months replaying the past, wishing her ex had acted differently, obsessing over all the things that were already done. It consumed her peace and made her feel powerless. One day, she came across the Stoic principle of focusing only on what you can control. It hit her. She couldn't control her ex. She couldn't change the past. But she could control her healing, her choices, and her future. From that day, Sarah shifted her focus. Instead of feeding anger or regret, she poured her energy into rebuilding her life. Slowly, she found peace again. Not because life became easier, but because she stopped giving power to things she could never change. So how do strong people practice this? First, they create clarity. Whenever worry creeps in, they separate what's in their hands from what isn't. Second, they practice letting go. They remind themselves that obsession won't alter outcomes. It only robs them of peace in the present. And third, they double down on what they can control. Their habits, their mindset, their effort. These are where their energy flows. At the end of the day, strong people know this. Peace doesn't come from controlling everything. It comes from controlling yourself. The world will always have storms, but strength means carrying calm inside you, no matter what happens outside. And when you stop obsessing over the uncontrollable, you finally gain the freedom to live fully in the only place that truly exists, the present moment. If you believe this video can help others, give it a like. It helps the YouTube algorithm show it to more people. And don't forget to subscribe for more awesome content coming your way. Share your thoughts in the comments. I will definitely reply.